Good morning. Asima is stoked. Crikey. Cricky. I think you meant crikey. Crack. And sorry if I butchered your name too, mate. I actually made it for a live stream. Looking forward to it. Good stuff. Nice. Well, yeah. Oh, where to begin? I'll get into my content in a moment, the proper content. I've rushed it here. I tend to rush everyone because I found someone on the internet that was wrong. Oh, no. Shock horror. And I had to put out a response. I'm going to read this there because I'm still trying to figure out the actual point here. um, Have I Been Pwned has gotten some extra traction this week because of the Synthient data, which we'll talk about soon. And just look at my graphs, watching how everything's processing. I will write a blog post about this, but I've got a big Samsung frame TV on the wall in portrait mode with Grafana graphs of everything on it. And it looks freaking awesome. And particularly while we're loading loads of stuff, we're loading more stuff at the moment. I'll talk about it in a moment. Well, we're loading more stuff now. I'll talk about it in a moment. There's a lot of things to look at. Anyway, the Synthient stuff we'll talk about in a moment. Got a lot of traction. I just noticed Mashable picked it up actually, which is good. So Mashable gave us a, where is this? Gave us a little tweet here. Your email might have been breached. Here's how to check. Mashable on Twitter, X, whatever. It's got 8.7 million followers at the moment, which is cool. So I was just looking over to see if anything interesting happened after they pushed that out. Oh, there was 40 minutes ago. Yeah. No, it's fine. You've got cloud. It'll scale. Somewhere along the line here, someone, I'll drop this in the chat. We can all read it. It's fun. We can pick this apart together. Simple X Chat says the problem with checking your address against data breaches is that with 99% probability, it's a form to harvest email addresses and not for checking them. That's a very specific number, wasn't it? 99%. It could have been 57% or 13%, but no, 99%. If you really wanted to, if they, which is me, Stefan and me, Charlotte, if they really wanted to warn you about the possibility of a breach, they would have shared the breached list. Is that actually asking for, I'm not even sure what that means, breach list. Does that mean just the list of all email addresses? Here's everyone in the Synthient stealer logs, for argument's sake. Here's 183 million email addresses. Good luck. Or at least asked for a hash, which doesn't work for a very simple reason. If we stored all of our data, all the email addresses as hashes, there's several problems with that. And incidentally, I've had this discussion so many times over 12 years now. It is not impossible, but it is highly unlikely someone is going to pop up today or tomorrow and go, have you thought about this thing that you could have been doing all along, which would revolutionize the privacy-preserving aspects of this system without taking anything away from people? And I'll be like, no, actually, I've never even thought about that. I have thought about this. I must have had this discussion 100 times. It's not to sound obnoxious and say I can't learn something new, because there might be a thing one day. But I feel like as the course of time goes on, unless something fundamentally new is invented, it's probably not going to be this one. It's not this guy anyway. If we were to store every email address as a hash, there are multiple problems. And the first really obvious one is a hash isn't really privacy preserving when you have 7 billion odd email addresses to begin with. Imagine we had 7 billion email addresses that are hashes, but we've also got the 7 billion plain text candidates. And all we have to do, let's say we store them for the sake of argument as SHA-1 hashes. We can't use salt. We'll come back to that in a moment. SHA-1 hashes. All we got to do is take our other 7 billion records, go through and SHA-1 hash those, which you can do very, very quickly. And then we have a rainbow table of plain text and hash pairs. And then we could figure out about 50% of the email addresses that are searched for anyway. And I say 50% because about 50% of searches come back with a hit. We know it's 50% because we return an HTTP 200 versus an HTTP 404 if we can't find the email address. So we're not logging the searches, but we can report on the HTTP response codes. That's privacy preserving. So we'd immediately crack half of them. The other reason we can't store them as hashes, and this is going to sound really, really obvious when I say it, is that you can't do domain searches anymore. Like, we would not be able to say, we'll put this in two different possible ways. If we were to hash the entire email address, we would not be able to do a domain search because we couldn't then take a plain text domain and figure out which of the hashed values on that domain. We also can't hash it in two parts, hash the alias and hash the domain. We could hash the domain, which allows someone to search for a domain, then you hash that, you find the domain, that's fine. But then every alias is hashed. So when someone searches for example.com after they prove they control and own example.com, all we could do is return a whole bunch of like SHA-1 hashes. And then they would have to go through and hash it. You see what a mess that is. It makes no sense. And then this person's also said, although without salting it would be vulnerable. Yes, it would be, but you can't salt it either. Because the only way that salt works is if the original plain text candidate, which is hashed with a salt, you use the same salt then to hash the one that you're looking for. This is how we do authentication. You know, someone registers, they provide a plain text, we generate a random salt, goes in there on the plain text password, we hash that, we store that, they come back later on, they provide their email address and password, web server goes to the database, says, give me the hash and the salt for this email address. Database comes back, you take the salt, you add it to the password, you hash it, you compare it. So you need to provide the same salt to both. So then you got to say, well, if we're storing the salt in the database, how do you get it on search for the particular hash? And then it's like, well, suddenly we can just go and crack everything anyway, because now you've got the plain text. It's inane. And then the last comment is kind of dumb too. Please don't enter your email address in any online forms you don't trust, and don't advise people to do it. Now, this is fascinating because it's more the human observation then of what is trust and how do you establish trust. Would you trust Ashley Madison? All right, maybe you wouldn't. But would you trust Adobe? Would you trust LinkedIn? Would you trust, again, I'm going to air quote that trust because it's just it's an overloaded word that people think is very simple, but is actually much more nuanced. How many of the 900 plus data breaches in Have I Been Pwned, how many of those websites would you trust with your email address? Also, it's an email address. It's not your passport number. It is not your credential pair. I've often had people say, my email address is very, and I wonder if this person thinks the same thing. My email address is very sensitive. I don't give it to anyone. Well, how do you get email? Like, it only works when you give it to someone. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't protect it and preserve it, but the whole premise of I would not enter my email address alone somewhere because something really bad is going to happen is nonsensical. It just doesn't work. I feel like about 60 seconds of Googling would have solved this problem, the confusion this person has. Like 60 seconds of Googling would probably bring his 99% down by about 99%. And it would also perhaps bring that trust level up. Like, how many governments have to send us data, or law enforcement agencies have to promote the server? And I mean, because of that, I'd find it more amusing than annoying. But anyway, on that Mashable one I mentioned earlier on as well, there was one reply as of the time of recording from someone here who says, how do we know Have I Been Pwned is not a phishing site? And I was going to respond with the most obvious possible answer. You don't. You don't know. But then you extend that. Well, it's got a padlock. It's got a padlock. Does that help? You extend that logic to every single service you use. How is it not a phishing site? Well, you then come back to how do you establish trust? You could do some Googling. You could find lots of references to it. Then you have to make sure that you're actually going to the right website. But you know, maybe one of the really, really obvious answers here, how do you know it's not a phishing site, is because, first of all, it's not impersonating anything else, assuming you know that you're at the right Have I Been Pwned. But second of all, again, it's an email address. I'm not here going, search for yourself in data breaches. Just enter your email address, password, mother's maiden name, and favorite color. It's like, that's not how it works. I feel there's a lot of tinfoil hatchery going on here. All right, let's have a look at the other comments here. Aaron's in Norway. Well, this is why I look presentable. I've had my hair cut. We are going back to Norway on Monday, so I might as well talk about that, and then I'll go to your other things here, because that was the first thing in my agenda here, my list. We will be heading back to Norway on Monday. We'll be having our quasi annual offsite with Stefan as well. The entire Have I Been Pwned team, the whole 3 trustworthy people together in Norway, catching up and trying to make sure that that we're on the right track and that we're not harvesting your email addresses for spam. So we'll be back to Norway next week for a little while, not doing any public events there at this point in time. I think I'll go and hang out with the NDC folks for a little bit. We'll be in Belgium for a couple of days after that, catching up with some friends there at the Belgian CERT. And after that, we'll be heading off to the Netherlands for the Intercop conference put on by Europol in The Hague. They seem to think I'm trustworthy enough. So we'll be back in the Netherlands, back in The Hague, and also spending some time with some of the other agencies that will be attending that event as well. I'm doing a brand new talk, which I assume is not going to be public, but I suspect I will do parts of it in other places. And let me tell you what I've titled this talk. I actually like this. It was partly ChatGPT generated. I wanted to do something. So this Intercop event, COP is Cyber Offenders Prevention. So a lot of what these agencies are doing, many people don't realize this, but a lot of what the agencies want to do is actually prevent the crime in the first place. It's not just about throwing the book at autistic kids who've hacked websites. So yeah, like obviously that happens a lot. But a lot of it is about how do we stop these incidents from happening in the first place? Because there are lots of challenges. You've got lots of kids involved in this, lots of neurodiverse folks who have a little bit more trouble figuring out where the responsible social boundaries are. So anyway, I've called this talk Pwned with Purpose, where motives meet mayhem. And a lot of this is about what I see in terms of why people are hacking websites, what is motivating them, what's driving them, why are they sending the data to us? Why do people keep sending data to the website with the funny name? We have ended up in all these places. So anyway, I think it's fun talk. It's mostly content I've never done before, so I'm spending a lot of time at the moment working on that. So we'll be back there, and then that means the next 2 of these weekly videos, the one next week I will do from Oslo, the one after that I'll probably do from Spa in Belgium, and the one after that I'll be back home. I may do late, we'll see. I'll arrive home very late the night before. So Aaron, to the rest of your question or comment here, my ISP thinks I am anyway, if you catch my drift. I'm in Norway. Well, my ISP thinks I am. Okay. All right, well, in that case, now I've read the rest of your sentence, you're on a VPN. Asamir says, glad they backed up that 99% with links to their data source. The thing is, like, obviously I don't give too much of a shit about it, if I'm completely honest. But that is the sort of thing where you see some people or some organizations get really uppity and start to throw around legal terms about slander or defamation or things like that. Look, it's the internet. People say dumb shit. I recognize it's dumb shit. Let's see if he is able to recognize his own dumb shit and correct that. We'll see. I don't know. It's like the Twitter of old now, isn't it? Where people just get online and I was commenting the other day, like it's obviously the social landscape has really, really changed online. But this is the Twitter of old. This is the keyboard warrior bullshit one. All right. Aaron says, if you can't trust Troy, you can't trust anyone. Well, that's a nice sentiment. Look, we get a little bit jaded because of the industry that we're in. But I would argue that the vast majority of people are actually very trustworthy. And unfortunately, it's the exceptions that we hear about. It's a little bit like, if there's a plane crash, it's on the news. You never see a news story that said, there were 10,000 plane flights today and nothing went wrong. You will only hear about that one, and then that will influence your view. we had a driving event a week ago that ended with a helicopter ride. It was very cool. And incidentally, I put all these on my Facebook because that seems to be the place where people are happy to see that stuff. So we're getting in the helicopter, and Charlotte's a little bit nervous about, and she's been in many helicopters before. This is not a brand new thing, but she's nervous about it. I'm like, we just drove on the road and you weren't worried at all. Have you seen the people on the, I'm worried about the people on the road. Choppers, no problems. I'm fine with that. Who has a public email? Their hands out. And a Proton email that I keep for more sensitive accounts, ones I don't want to give out. But how do you know who to trust with the more sensitive one? Again, it's a problem. Would you trust Qantas? Here we are on the data breach time. Would you trust Prosper the week before, the financial services lending app? Raj says, what's your thoughts on the introduction of the digital ID in the UK? Oh boy. So this is the Online Safety Act in the UK, where I assume you're talking about the Online Safety Act, which then obviously requires some form of identification, where the reasonably legitimate concern is the exposure of minors to content that they shouldn't see. Now, whether it's porn or whether it's gore, or let's all just agree that there is a bar at which we would like to set, under which we think that people of a certain age shouldn't have access to it. I think the whole sort of social construct of you're 17 and 364 days old, none of this is okay, and then like the clock ticks over and then suddenly it's fine, is a little bit odd. And as parents, we tend to make our own decisions on a lot of these things, but where the government then comes in and says, you need to start age gating stuff, as a premise, I don't mind the premise. It's just the execution, because there's just simply no execution that doesn't have a potentially adverse privacy impact. So, it's not just the likes of adult content. We're seeing things like, Discord's a good example. Where there are Discord channels where there is an assumption that someone needs to be of a certain age and that person is not a sufficient age, folks in the UK have been getting challenged to provide identity proof. Discord has had a data breach. And that data breach has included people with their head like this, holding up their driver's license and a photo of it. And that is a massive impact on privacy, not just because you now know that information about someone, but you also now have some pretty good content to be able to go and impersonate them somewhere else. So I'm very worried about that side of things. We have a similar challenge coming up here in Australia. So in December, we will have the under 16 social media ban take place. Now I pause there because I'm trying to find the right words. The government's like, it's not a ban, you just can't use social media if you're under 16. It's a ban. So what that means is our 16-year-old son, who got social media on his 13th birthday, as per the terms and conditions of social media platforms, he's fine. Our 13-year-old daughter, who got it earlier this year when she turned 13, will have it taken away, unless she can prove her age. Now, she won't be able to obviously prove that she's 16. Our son would be able to prove at 16, but will he have to present his newly acquired driver's license? Now that he's 16, you get your learners in Australia. Will he then have to present that? And what risk does that create? Does that then create the Discord problem? When we look at the implementations of identity verification, first of all, identity verification is hard, either as individuals or as online services. We just had the discussion about how do I know if I can trust have I been pwned? It's actually a good question. How do you know that you can trust any website you go to? And I think by trust, we mean that the site is what it represents to be, that it is going to use your email address, for example, to look up data breaches and then not store it, and that's it. Or it is going to legitimately allow you to find a partner to have an affair with on Ashley Madison, and that's all it's going to do. We've had things like extended validation certificates, which are just a complete clusterfuck and useless, and that's why we don't really have them in any meaningful way anymore. I know there's a comment down here later about paying for certificates, so we'll come back to that. We do not have a good model, and every time some vendor comes up with what they think is a good model, it's not a good model. That's why we have the internet as it is today. But it's the same for individuals. How do you prove your identity when you go to a service? And I hate to say it, but probably the most technically reliable way we can do this is with government issued IDs, where we can authenticate to a government service and have some sort of identity proof relayed to the origin site, either an identity proof in terms of this is the identity of the individual, or a proof of an attribute such as a proof of age. Now, as a good example, we have digital driver's licenses here in our state. We got them a couple of years ago. The app shows a QR code. Now, you can choose whether you're going to show the QR code that has your full address on it, or whether you're going to show the QR code that has just a proof of age. The QR code has a validity period of something like 10 seconds. It means, and I've never actually had to do this, probably because I look older than, what do they say? If you look under 25, you've got to show your ID, even though everything's 18 here. But the theory is you go into a bar and they're like, show us your QR code. You show them the QR code. They scan it with a verifier. Everyone's app is also a verifier, so you can scan someone else's if they show it to you. And it will come back with a photo of their face. It is, last time I checked, it was internet dependent. And simply 18 plus, because that's all you need to get into a bar. That is a government issued scheme. And then people are worried, well, if I'm using a government issued scheme in order to watch my porn, will they, A, know that I'm watching porn, B, know what kind of porn I'm watching? Don't take these clips of me out of context of everything else. I'm talking metaphorically. It's not metaphor. I'm talking about other people. Not talking about me. But anyway, you see the point. Like, governments have the mechanics and the identity proofs in place to be able to do this. And I would argue that that is a much better model than selfie holding your driver's license and then Discord chucks it on a server that's publicly accessible. That's my thoughts on that. Aaron has a question. Do auditors that audit websites like paid for SSL certificates like DigiCert? That's what I heard. Wanted to know what your thoughts were. I hope this makes sense. So, oh, Scott's here. Scott has thoughts about this. Scott, do those paid certs work? DigiCert work? Scott and I have had many, many, many years of doing talks around the world on stages together about the insanity of paid certificates and extended validation certificates. And Aaron, your best bet is to Google Scott's name and certificates. But paid certificates work just the same as free certificates. They all use the same cryptographic implementations. The likes of DigiCert have said a lot of things that we disagree with over the years. I think that's fair to say, isn't it, Scott? I'm sure that if you go to Twitter and search for either Scott's handle or my handle and DigiCert, you'll find a lot of content on that. So no, that's not gonna make a lot of sense. Sam, did you fix the CoinHive certificate issue? Yes, I went to DigiCert and I paid a lot of money. No, I didn't. Yes, I did fix the problem. It was a configuration at Cloudflare. It's kind of ironic because that CoinHive certificate is really only served when embedded JavaScript is served to run crypto mining in someone's browser in the background. So they never would have seen it anyway. So I guess it didn't really break anything. It just stopped my warning popping up. And I do want to do more work with that too, Sam, the whole CoinHive thing. Aaron wants to go to Norway. It looks absolutely stunning. It is. Do you decide if you're coming to Norway, Scott? Next week? Next weekend? I think it's next weekend. Stefan was asking how far it is from here. So door to door, he was asked, not on the chat here, offline. Door to door, from the moment we walk out here and get a car to the airport to the moment we walk into an Airbnb in Oslo, it's about 29 hours. So Australia's a long way from everywhere. James, I've had a car stall. I don't want a helicopter stall. Yeah, I think they work differently, as is my understanding. James says, miner has seen plenty in the mines. We shouldn't expose them to more. Yeah. Asmir says, isn't the point about emails moot? If everyone just used Alias or services like Simple Login, which is included with Proton subscriptions, well, then you're sort of talking about one provider implemented service. I mean, I guess the joy of email is that it's ubiquitously available. It's the one thing that works everywhere. I notice the young people these days, I think that's the way to put it. I've heard some people say, well, everyone just shares their Instagram handles. People just don't even have an email. Well, how do you buy anything online? Because I've never bought it, like, the groceries, for example, or a t-shirt or a ticket to somewhere. I've never bought that without having to provide an email address because that is the ubiquitous form of identification. Hands of the thing you can trust have been pwned because it's been around for decades, or 1.2 decades, with a great reputation. Microsoft trust Troy, Scott, DeStefan, etc. Yeah, well, again, trust is very, very hard to define. Marek says the same digital driver's license system in New South Wales, which is our next state down, and I believe a shared national system is now in the works. Look, we're nowhere near as bad as America. However, Australia is still a little bit odd the way things work differently in different states. And a little bit like America, we have states where there's, one side of the road is one state, the other side of the road is another state. When we had COVID, 30 kilometres south, we were in the state that was pretty clean and had none. But that state over the border, and you get a lot of people live on one side, take kids to school on the other side, etc. That state got locked down hard, and they literally barricades down the middle of the road, which normally you cross from one side of the street to get your bread and then the other side to get your meat or something like that. It's crazy. To have different driver's license systems and things, I think, is a bit nuts. Lots of other different road rules and things. E-bikes, for example. I think in New South Wales, you can have a 500-watt motor. Here, you can only have a 250-watt. It's just like bizarrely different stuff for people who are not only in the same country, but very often living on the same street. You're just on different sides of it. I think I'm going to skip over the EV discussion. It's still painful to read. James says, there's no perfect system. I keep coming back to requiring proof of age to activate data services on phones if we weren't going to make parents do their jobs. I think a lot of the stuff with things like the Online Safety Act in the UK is that there is the whole issue around the privacy risks of proving identity. But then there's also the whole thing around it's so easy to circumvent anyway. And I shared a tweet when that act first came into effect around the request. Let's do it again now. The request for VPNs in the UK. If we go to trends.google.com and let's explore VPN, the microphone over my keyboard here. And we're going to do... Let's do the past 90 days. I think that covers the introduction of that. Now, globally, actually, no, it's defaulted to Australia. Australia is pretty flat for that entire time. And I'm going to share this once, let's look at the results here. United Kingdom. Oh, yeah. Okay, yep. I just got to go back a little bit more. Let's make it 12 months, and then you'll see the clear trend. Okay, so let me drop this in the chat. Yoink. So there's the trend, so you can see. Obviously, everyone got really interested in this in the week of July 13 to 19. Now, interestingly, that interest literally went like, went from 18 to 100. So it literally went 5x in the space of like a week or two. And it's now come back to probably about 50% higher than what it traditionally was. So I guess most people have got their VPNs and are now watching their porn through Amsterdam or something like that. So the point is that even when you have robust identity verification controls, if the service that you're trying to access is readily enough accessible from places that don't require the identity controls, well, here we are. And then, of course, there was the whole argument that the big websites, I mean, let's stick with the adult one because it's easy. So if it's Pornhub, they're obviously massive and they, I guess, have the target on their back. So they completely pulled out of certain US, it's a bad term, completely left certain US states. And people were just like, okay, well, a VPN into the state next door. There's a whole bunch of lesser tier or smaller tier, very often shadier services that are not going to implement those age gates. They might be a US-based adult website, and they're like, screw you guys in the UK. Like, we're just an American cheapo porn site. We're going to do whatever we want. And then, of course, there's all the stuff which is just there on social media. Like, it is crazy how easy it is to find this stuff, I've been told, on social media or just Google searches. And all of that circulates or circumvents the age gate. All right, what else is on here? Aaron bought a router just to route VPN traffic. It's up today. It's great. Cool. James says they created a bill to also ban how VPNs are used in my state, Michigan, and expect ISPs to somehow enforce it. Well, obviously the ISPs are going to need to have a look at what's inside your VPN traffic. That's the only way they're going to enforce it. Good luck with that. Told the bill will never go anywhere. It's ridiculous. And look, that's often what happens with some bills, where I think if you try to be objective about it, and thinking back to my little bit of exposure when I went to Congress and testified there in the US, the lawmakers that you see on the TV and that are the face of these bills, they're having to be across everything from, in my case, when I went and spoke about data breaches to the opioid epidemic, and then everything in between. And they are the talking heads. Behind them, there are staffers who are genuine experts. The folks that I spent time with in DC were really, really, really switched on in the cybersecurity space. And they need to sort of distill all of this down and pass that information up to congressmen and congresswomen, for example, in the US, in a way that they can try and understand it. And then often you're talking about much older generation folks as well, when you're talking about politics in general, I think particularly in the US, I'd argue. So how do they end up grasping that? So yeah, I'm not surprised, James, that some of that stuff just goes nowhere. James says a smart speaker says it's time to feed the dog. I can't get it off because he knows the message. All right, not so sure about that, but let me go on to the next thing, which I think is going to be, the Synthient data, which is kind of the big topic of the day. Well, let's do that regardless. We pushed 182 million email addresses into Have I Been Pwned, probably 48 hours ago now. And Stealer logs, I actually think we have an issue with the way that we're processing this. I'll start from the bottom of the blog post and go back up. The problem that we have is that Stealer logs are obtained through info stealers, which is malware, running on infected machines. Every website you go to and you enter your credentials into, it's snaring those. So it's getting your email address and your password and the website that you've entered into. So when you look at a typical Stealer log row, you're seeing something like, one of the guys I contacted, it was like accounts.google.com/login/ whatever. And then his Gmail account and then the password that he was actually using. I'll talk about that more in a moment. So you've got this data that's being collected on the fly. It's being sent back to some CNC server locally, or remotely rather, where all of this is aggregated. So there's a constant feed of data from let's call it gazillions, because I'm not sure if it's millions or hundreds of thousands or tens of gazillions of infected machines. It's a constant flow of this data. And then the threat actors that are accumulating this are then advertising it, particularly on Telegram, but also on various forums and on the clear web, on onion sites, on social media. And you've got a whole bunch of stuff they're putting out there as tasters for free. And then you've got other stuff which is obviously commercialized and monetized. And some of that is accessible as well. I think, not to quote me on this, but Ben, our man who passed the data to Have I Been Pwned, said he may have had access to some of that too. So my point is that it is a constant fire hose. And then once every 4, 5, 6 months or something, we get someone send us a great big aggregation of it, and we look at it and we go, okay, well, a bunch of it we've seen before because it all gets recycled, but then a bunch of it is new. We'll load it as one big corpus. We'll add all the new stuff, but then we'll add all the email addresses which may have been notified before as well. And then there's a big hoorah about it. And then Mashable's tweeting you. it's not really reflective of the nature of how these stealer logs emerge. This is something Stefan and Charlotte and I are going to be talking about when we're in Oslo. It's about how do we create a model that's a little bit more reflective of the way this data is actually processed. So yeah, for example, do we have ingestion pipelines that we get people like Ben from Synthient to keep sending new data into? And maybe they do that many times in a day, in which case we move away from like the monolithic collections of stealer log data, where there's 182 million records in one go. And maybe there is instead tens of thousands of records a day just constantly flowing in. And that changes things like notifications, for example. It has lots of other impacts on the way we manage that service. But I think that that's probably the path forward, assuming we see enough long-term value in it for the people who are actually in these logs. So anyway, Ben got in touch and he gave us a very large amount of data. So we were well over 3 terabytes in total. One file alone was nearly 3 terabytes. And now this has also led to discussions around why isn't my computer fast enough, which we'll talk about in a moment when we get to the bit about me trying to upgrade that. Stefan has been blitzing through it. I feel like Stefan, mate, you seem to have incommensurately enjoyed the challenge of how fast can I read large volumes of data. I think it's just one of those, my sense is one of those bees you got in your bonnet where it's like, how fast can I make this sucker go? And it is impressive. I'll let you share stats if you want. So anyway, we've gone through and processed all this. What we actually found is the data that Ben had accumulated was a combination of stealer log entries, which is what I've just described, and credential stuffing lists. Now, credential stuffing lists are just email address and password pairs. The context of where they are valid for doesn't exist. I am in credential stuffing lists. I know that those credential stuffing lists have been put together by people taking previous data breaches where the passwords are either in plain text or protected with weak hashing algorithms, hashes were cracked, and then they go into lists where you are one of billions of credential pairs. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with credential stuffing lists. Now, well, we should all hate them, but I guess the love part is the desire to actually process them. In early 2019, we had what is still the largest single data breach that we've ever put into Have I Been Pwned, which was the Collection 1 credential stuffing list. Now, if I go and have a look on Have I Been Pwned, yep, there we go, 773 million records. And I'm going to drop that into the chat here in case anyone wants to have a read of that. It was huge. Processing that was extraordinarily difficult. It took a huge amount of work, and I remember finally getting it live whilst I was sitting at the airport with my son. So this was, oh shit, this is more than 6 years ago now. Wow, so it was like 9. We were sitting at the airport in Brisbane about to fly to Norway to go snowboarding, actually with Scott and Charlotte. And I'm sitting at the airport processing this, and we get it live, and then I just get absolutely smashed and overwhelmed. And in fact, the blog post about it has got over 400 comments on it, so it got a huge amount of traction. Because when you load credential stuffing lists, people are like, well, which website is it for? It's useless to me unless I know which website it's for. And people get angry too. People get really angry on the internet. Which website is it for? Give me the password for my email address. This is useless information. Why are you sending this to me? Well, you don't have to use it. You can just ignore it and go about your business. So it's sort of fraught with problems, and like stealer logs, it recycles over and over and over and over again. So when we're looking at this data that Ben has sent, we went through the stealer logs. We found in total 91% of the email addresses in stealer logs we had already in Have I Been Pwned, largely from other stealer logs, but there's still 9%. There are 16 million plus people in those Synthient stealer log records that we'd never seen before. And that was really the catalyst for loading it. If there's 16 million people that have never known that they're in a data breach of stealer logs, then this is really useful information. The credential stuffing lists, that's what Stefan's now processing. So I can see our database still scaled all the way up while Stefan loads data and creates indexes and makes this information queryable. But I think, Stefan, you said there are about 2 billion records of credential stuffing, which are now being uploaded. We have to try and get a sense of how much of that is genuinely new. So our logic here is, I think this is what we agreed on, mate. He'll upload 2 billion records. We will find what percentage of those are new versus pre-existing. We will find the most recent, Stefan says upload is done, indexing now. We'll find the most recent 100 of our subscribers that are in the list of people we haven't seen before, and then I'll email each of them. And I'll go, hey, we've found you in a new data breach. Would you be willing to help? I've got to read the list of, I'll come back to this. Would you be willing to help verify whether your data is accurate? Now, my cursory checks, I'm not even going to repeat the number, but my cursory checks, because I'm not confident in it, my cursory checks earlier on said there was a very large number of new email addresses that we hadn't seen before. So that's the one thing we're going to quantify in total across the entire corpus, not just a downsampled set. Now, if that's the case, and then we have a large number of people say, yeah, that information is correct, because we don't know. Like if we see an email address and a password, we've got 2 strings. Are those 2 strings real? Do they belong together? And the only way we can know is to actually ask people in there. So if it's sufficiently new, we will consider loading that. And my gut feel is that it's going to be much bigger than the 700 odd million records in that other one. And it may be the first billion plus data set that we load, which would be big. That actually creates multiple issues. I'll talk about one of those issues in a moment. I just want to come back to the thing I remembered. When I was verifying this Synthient data, I did the same thing as I just mentioned. Let's go and grab our most recent 100 subscribers who are in this data set that we have not seen in other Stealer logs before. In fact, that we haven't seen in any data breaches before. It just made it easier. And I got in touch with those people, sent 100 emails, 2 people replied. In fairness, one person had 3 separate email addresses in that corpus, because many people have separate email addresses. They subscribe them one after the other because they're on Have I Been Pwned going, look, I'll monitor all my things. But we got literally 2% of people actually respond. So anyhow, one person was on, I'm reading the blog post here, the website that was recorded was accounts.google.com/sign-in/challenge/pwd/1. They had, I referred to it as a suboptimal password. I won't say what it is. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was rubbish. It was rubbish, but it wasn't in Pwned passwords. It is now because Stefan's loaded it all up. Another person, I'll just read these out. Another person was like, yes, I would like to help support, because I email them and go, look, I've found you in a set of data. I'm after your help to verify, I'm legit. Trust me. We've had the discussion about trust. If you're willing, I'll send you your data. Would you like me to send you your data? So this person was like, yes. Now, when I took his email address and then I pulled out all the websites that this person had been to, there was a trend. And you're just going to read these out so you can spot the trend. arsonfurious.com, feelporn.com, go.vrporn.com, orientbeauties.net, arsonfurious.com with the entire HTTPS. It's important you watch that stuff over a secure connection. HTTPS scheme in front of it. asiandate.com, asiandating.com, orientbeauties.net, vrporn.com without the go in front of it, xhamster. And then the last one, which I thought was particularly fascinating, was not just the host name, but the path, which was /masturbation /Maxi Rhodes PVC nurse. Now, when I found all this and I sent it to the guy, I'm like, there's no way he's going to reply to this. Because it wasn't just that. There was a whole bunch of stuff with casinos and a whole bunch of stuff with crypto. So I sent it to him and I was so convinced he wouldn't reply. I already added text under it. And I was like, predictably, this person didn't reply, but clearly there is a pattern here. But he did reply. And he was like, yep, that's me. So at least you're honest. That actually helps us. And I didn't ask specifically, but you just sort of get the sense, particularly when you get to all the casino and online gaming stuff. It's like you've installed stuff that you shouldn't have, haven't you? You are the demographic of the person who would install something that is actually an info stealer. So the point is that we got very emphatic confirmation from the people that did reply. And incidentally, the 100 people that we emailed, every one of those is someone who has double opted in to have been pwned. So they've gone there, they've gone in the notification section, enter their email address, click submit, email's been sent to them, and the email says you now need to verify you want to be in there, and then they click the link in the email and it verifies them, job done. So my point is that we might have only got like a 2%, or if we include the Pwned guy in the second one who had 3 different email addresses, so I guess that makes it 4%. But they were all legitimate people. Now, incidentally, one of the problems that we have in processing data of this size, and Stefan, I don't know if you saw my PR to help address this, but we sent, I think, 57,000 emails to people monitoring domains. So there are 57,000 people, and I guess they'd be monitoring. They might have been monitoring more than that because many people monitor multiple domains but only get one email. Let's just call it 57,000 different organizations impacted here. So we send all those out, and then we had about 194,000. I know it all added up to about 250,000. 194,000 individuals who had signed up, and they were in there. And one of the problems we have when we send that many emails is we can get throttled by the receiving mail server. So for example, we have had issues with Gmail throttling inbound mails because we send normally at this rate, and then it's a little bit like VPNs and Online Safety Act in the UK. Suddenly the interest just spikes like this, and they're like, now you're absolutely smashing us with emails. This looks spammy. So we're going to delay the delivery. And the problem with, say, Google delaying delivery is that it's not such a biggie if you delay the delivery of a notification that you've been in a data breach and you get it several hours later. But it's a big problem if you're trying to sign into your dashboard to do the domain search to then find out which of your staff are in there. So what we've done in the past is our notification process is literally just a console app and a VM. It's not high tech. It's another thing we need to improve, Stefan. And what it does is it's like, okay, so we found this many email addresses in domain subscribers, this many individual subscribers. How long would you like to sleep before emailing the individuals? Because I'm trying to give the domain people who need to sign into their dashboard, for example, 2 hours to be able to do that. But then if you send a couple of 100,000 emails in a very short amount of time after that, that's a problem. So the way we send emails and have it been pwned is when you send an email, for example, when you go to sign into your dashboard, we drop a message in an Azure storage queue. There is then an Azure function which monitors that queue. It picks up the queue message and then it sends it. And that queue message is just a bunch of JSON with the body and the description of who it goes to. So what I did, Stefan, just the other day is I have defined a rate at which we'll send emails. And for the moment, I've said it's 500 per minute. And then what we're doing is if we find 200,000 email addresses, we go, okay, well, we can only send 500 a minute. Let's randomize the delay before which it's visible in the storage queue. So now what's happening is when we dump emails into that storage queue, they've got a visibility timeout on them. So some of them might be available immediately. So we drop it in the queue, it gets picked up, sent straight away. Some of them might not be visible to the Azure function for 6 hours. So they get a delayed delivery. So we try and iron it out. I think 500 a minute is the right amount, but we'll see. I got a bunch of comments here, so I'm just going to have a look at if there's anything noteworthy here that needs a comment. Aaron said, one of my emails, HLBP said the bots got it from Telegram. What's that about? That Benjamin's here. Okay, so Benjamin B is our man from Synthient who provided the data, so he can probably best answer those. The peak, being conscious, there are people that listen to this in the podcast later on as well, so I'll repeat some of this. Ben says, the peak I saw was 600 million unique credentials in a day, with most of it just being content rebranded by different actors. Yeah, it's filtering out the noise is the challenge, isn't it? There's so much noise. James says, a VPN is how I connect to my smart home, and so many people connect to work. Deep packet inspection isn't going to tell you good or bad VPN. And we come back to the moral neutrality of encryption. Encrypted traffic, arguably the vast bulk of encrypted traffic, even over VPNs, is very legitimate. But some of it is not. Good guys get encryption, bad guys get encryption. So Stefan says on his speed, if you consider being able to parse and extract emails from a 2.8 terabyte file in 15 minutes fast, then I guess I made it fast. Humble brag. That's awesome. That's crazy speeds. Like we have an open source email extractor, and I'm sure that we can open source the work Stefan's doing here as well, but we have an open source email extractor, which is out there in the community. We've used it for years. It's fine for everything up until when you get to like multi-terabyte files. And then we start to run into problems. Mark says, maybe still logs should also have an indicator whether they're considered active or inactive, though that adds another data maintenance factor. The problem also is, how do you define active and inactive? The most that we can do with any of this is say when we first see it, but that can be very misleading as well, because we could first see something that actually emerged 4 years ago. It's just taken a while to appear. I feel like it's just one of those things where we can provide the information that we have in a fashion that's sufficiently privacy preserving and doesn't create too much risk. So namely, we're not going to provide credential pairs. We do not want to sit on that. And then you got to figure out what you want to do with it. All those passwords went into Pwned passwords. So if you're using the 1Password password manager, for example, and you go into Watchtower, you'll see if your passwords are being exposed in that list. And then if you're not using 1Password, you're probably using, a password manager, you're probably using the same password everywhere, so you don't have much to go and check on the website anyway. And says you can make OpenVPN look like 443 traffic, which would be TLS traffic, so ISPs can't deep packet the traffic. I haven't been to China for a little while now, but people say, try using a VPN in China. Using any of these techniques. Apparently it is pretty much near impossible to have a VPN connection in China now, because all of the typical tricks and techniques that people use just don't fly. I think, Benny, when you say, what about showing the last two characters or something, if that's of a password, it's not just the risk of having a credential pair, and obviously just showing the last two characters helps mitigate that. It's also the extraordinarily excessive overhead that then creates for us to track. Instead of saying, here's all the unique passwords we have, it's in one corpus, here's all the unique email address, you're then creating the many-to-many, right? So you've then got to have, somewhere then have I been pwned, this mapping that says for the however many hundreds of millions of people we put in from a steal log, these are the various passwords I had against them with the last two characters. It just massively amplifies the overhead. And a little bit like the same reason I've often given when, let's say, very legitimate big companies that we all know have come up and say, hey, look, is there any way we can get credential pairs? Because we're just trying to see if any of our users are using things that have been breached. I'm like, the answer is always use Pwned passwords. If they're using a password that's in there, it doesn't matter whether or not it was used by your user or someone else. If it's in that list, it's a shit password, because they've both got dogs with the same name, or they both went to university in the same year, or they both like the same car manufacturer, F1 team, or whatever other really poor criteria people use to create passwords. Like, crack down on that. I know what you're saying, and I can see where the value is, but I would argue that we get 90% of the value and 100% of the privacy preserving and like reducing our overhead benefit from not storing them together. Lots of VPN stuff here. All right. Oh, Rich is here. That's good timing because I'm going to talk about computer stuff, and that is right up his alley. So the last thing that actually the second last thing. Where was I going to do the PC? I was going to do the PC build stuff up front. Screw it. I'll do it later. Second last thing is we've now hit, speaking of Pwned passwords, 17 billion monthly requests. So we're now doing 17 billion requests. It requests every 30 days. So it's even more than that on a monthly basis. I'll drop the tweet here that has that stat in. I tweeted it the other day just before doing that blog post on Synthient because it has, it doesn't want to put that. Let's take out that massive query string on the end and see if that works. I wanted to have a stat that I could embed there in that Synthient Steelog blog post. So here we go. This is where we are at the passwords. 17.45 billion requests in 30 days. That's an average of 6,733 requests per second. But at the peak, we're doing 42,000 requests in a 1 minute block. And that's wild. And this is all, of course, powered by Cloudflare, where we're still tracking at like 99.99% cache hit ratio as well. That doesn't mean that 99.99% of people are using the same password. It's the k-anonymity model that we use. Google it if you're not familiar with it. But they're massive numbers. And every month when I check our usage, it's not like I do it formally. Roughly, it's like, hey, haven't checked it for a while. We seem to have another billion. And that's wild. So that's obviously fed from data such as what Ben's provided. So the impact that Ben and Synthient have on the community here is, there's 7.5 billion times a month where the data he's provided is able to be checked and seen if it's been a data breach. And it's much more than that too, because of those 7.5 billion, it's a bunch of people downloading this corpus of data so they can use it in their own systems and not be dependent on our k-anonymity API, which is fine. So it's got massive, massive, massive traction. That is fed into as well by the likes of the FBI, the NCA, other law enforcement agencies that either have an ingestion pipeline or when they find botnets, malware campaigns, shady online websites collecting people's credentials, they feed that data into this service too. So that's really cool. Totally free, great anonymity model. If you don't trust it, download it all. We don't even know who's using it. The only way we know who's using it, we'll have a look here, is from referrer headers. So sorry, we do know some people are using it, but the only way we get referrer headers, it's a new option here from Cloudflare. Web analytics, privacy first analytics on the performance web pages, real use. I know we actually need that because it's not a website. We only sort of serve API requests from there. But then when I click that link, I can't get my referrers. No data available. Enable RUM for free. Ooh, free, I like that. Enable globally. When someone embeds Pwned passwords in the website and the client makes calls directly to there rather than them making calls server side, we get the referrer header. So it is literally someone's browser saying, hey, I've come from, for example, telstra.com.au, our biggest telco. I'm on this web page and I'm checking Pwned passwords. We get those referrer headers, which is actually quite useful. But it looks like because I've just enabled something new in Cloudflare, I don't have data for that yet. Anyway, we know Telstra is one of the big ones, BBC. We can name these because they're literally making requests to our site from their website. They've embedded our service. There's no secrecy about it. We have other customers we wouldn't name because privacy. So that's pretty cool. And as Stefan says, the traffic is on an exponential increase. So he has replied to that tweet that I just shared that shows the graph that I think he did at NDC in Copenhagen the other day, which is really cool. As Richard says, a billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon you'll be talking about real cache hits. Aaron said, maybe a bad password, but could be a good passphrase. Yeah, well, as long as it's there with other stuff. Scott, caching is cheating. No, it's not. It's not cheating. All right, let's look at this PC build. So last week I started talking about this, and partly out of necessity to process large amounts of data, and partly out of jealousy that Stefan's got a better computer than me, I want to go and do a new build. Now, back in the day, as in like 30 years ago, I was building my own machines. I was very happy doing that, and I had a lot of fun. And then things have moved on. And now what I really need is a fast machine that meets that sweet spot where there's still an ROI. And this is one of the hard things, because people start saying, well, what's your budget? Well, I don't know. Like, I think I'll feel it when, if someone says this is going to be $50,000, I'll be like, that exceeds my budget. This is not what I want. But if it's $5,000, it's like, oh, I'm happy to go higher than that if I get the return on it. So I don't know. What I'm really looking for, and I'll drop the gist in here into the chat as well for folks who want to have a read of this. I'm really looking for is just to try and better optimize the workflow at the moment. I mean, Stefan's example is great. 15 minutes to parse through a 2.8 terabyte file and extract data is blistering. Now, he's got a fast Samsung Pro NVMe SSD. He's obviously got it sitting in a fast bus on a fast motherboard. He has fast top to bottom, and it's evidenced by the results he got. So, you know, that's a really positive outcome. Now, what I want is just enough general community guidance, and I think I have that in this gist now. I had some really, really good comments in here. Some people I assume know what they're doing. Damien Edwards from Microsoft is in here. I know he knows what he's doing. He gave me some great feedback as well. And Stefan, Threadripper is the constant theme here. I know you're saying some of the stats show that wasn't necessarily the best ROI, but it is coming up very consistently. I think this is now enough that I'm going to go to a couple of Aussie companies that do custom builds and just go, hey guys, have a look at this. This is what I need to do with it. This is what my people, my community is saying, you know, give me a proposal about what you want to build. My gut feel is I think to build something that has a good ROI and that I will use, let's say for the next 5 years, this machine here I've been using, this is a Lenovo desktop in a tower that's 5 years old. My gut feel is I think it'll end up being 10 grand US maybe, something like that, which is a lot of money for a computer, but it's a lot of ROI too. It makes a lot of sense. That's my gut feel. Don't tell the companies I'm going to ask to quote on that. I don't want them to highball it. So we'll see. And then, of course, the challenge is always, particularly when you're looking at things like CPU speeds, it's like, I could get some more gigahertz, but then suddenly it's law of diminishing returns. And then I've got to spend $2,000 to get some more gigahertz. And do I get the return on those? And that's where it gets a little bit tricky. So I think we're just trying to find that sweet spot. Scott says, if you want fast, you want Threadripper. Oh, well, that is the theme here. Stephen said, Threadripper is great if you have the money to spend. For my purpose, it was way overkill. But as James says, what number can you put on beating Stefan? So that's a good point. That's a very good point. Aaron says, 2025 is the year of the desktop Linux. Yeah, well, so that's the other thing. It'll run Windows 11. I'm not even going to get into the debate about other operating systems, and I put that in the gist here as well. In the same way, I'm not going to get into the debate about can't I just offload all that workload to the cloud. You just, for this sort of processing, you cannot beat doing this locally on the metal where the clock's not ticking. And I'm not looking over there saying, hey, Stefan, we're still running at 80 cores on that database, which is really expensive. Can we make it go fast? You get into that cycle when you're paying dollars per resource per minute. So Scott says, I overclocked mine to the hills to get a couple more years of life out of it. Huh, okay. Stephen says, I'll start putting thread sleep statements unless it's running on my machine. Aaron, do you use Linux in the cloud? Everyone uses Linux in the cloud. It's like, there's so many things you use. I think your question is more specifically, are we spinning up Linux instances in the cloud? No, we're not, but we were discussing the other day, weren't we, Stefan, that some of the Linux instances in Azure might be more performant for I think we were saying the way we run functions. Yeah, and as Scott said, isn't the cloud serverless? Well, yeah, and this is the irony of it, because functions in particular are the serverless implementation of Azure. And how can there be Linux if there's no servers? Aaron says HIBP is Windows. So, well, what is HIBP? It's many different things. When you make a request to have a been pwned, the first piece of our infrastructure you hit is Cloudflare. I don't know what Cloudflare runs. I assume it's a Linux of some kind or another, but it's sitting there on the edge doing serverless things, and then hitting R2 storage, which probably also runs on Linux. Shut up, Scott. I do not work for Microsoft. Which also runs on Linux. And then when it goes through to the origin, it could go to an Azure serverless function, which I believe is running on Windows infrastructure. It could go to the app service, which is the website, which is definitely running on Windows. But then it's also going to the SQL database, which would be running on Windows. It's also going to table storage and message queues and blobs. That I think is running on Windows. But I mean, Scott made the point here about serverless. I kind of don't want to think about it. Where possible, I just want services that run code fast and then charge me for what they run. James says, my wife is getting switched to Linux right now. I load on a new drive, but I have to move settings over. She almost exclusively uses the browser. Perfect candidate. Well, yeah, if the browser is your operating system, it kind of doesn't really matter in a way, does it? In a way, that's kind of beautiful when you get away from all of that. Look, everyone has their own preferences based on their own history and other factors. For me, I've obviously been a Linux user in various different ways. I've got lots of Raspberry Pis. All of these graphs and things are running off Raspberry Pi at the moment. There are times where we use Linux for various reasons, but Windows is the thing that I've always used and I've always been familiar with. And there is friction in deviating from that. And sometimes there is justification for that friction, but other times it is friction that just makes your life hard. Charlotte had a MacBook originally, and the number of times she would want to do something that to my mind was extraordinarily basic, and I can't remember exactly what the word, it'd be things like, I don't know, like adding a printer for argument's sake, or monitoring the print queue. And I'm not familiar with Mac. I don't know where that is. I'd have to go and look it up. She didn't know how it worked either. And I'll kind of joke through and go, you don't know how to use your computer. I don't know how to use your computer. Let's get your Windows machine. And then all those problems go away. And then the only remaining complaint is, I liked the look of the other one better. It's a work machine. I don't care. All right. So anyway, that's what I think about that. So I think that's it, folks. I'm going to wrap that up there. We are now counting down to departure in 3 days. I've got to finish presentations. I think maybe the first thing I'm going to do when I drop off this is I'm going to go and send some emails to some builders about this PC build list. And then hopefully when I do this in a week from now in Oslo, I'll be able to talk about what has been proposed, and then we'll just see what people think. And, hopefully folks will come back and go, yeah, that seems like the sweet spot. That seems like a good setup, and I can get someone to build it. And with any luck, I'll come back here in a few weeks and I'll have a new machine. Cheers, folks. Catch you later.